California's coast just rose 6 feet overnight, and scientists are shocked by the hidden void they discovered, because what happened along hundreds of miles of coastline defies every law of geology and suggests something is deliberately hollowing out California from beneath. Picture beaches that were at sea level yesterday, now sitting 6 feet above the waves, harbors stranded high and dry, and marine life gasping on what used to be the ocean floor. This isn't erosion or normal coastal change. This is the land itself rising like a massive elevator, and it happened so fast that tide pools were left behind by the retreating sea. But here's what has geologists in complete panic. Deep underground scans reveal a massive geometric void, a hollow space the size of several city blocks that appeared beneath the coastline at the exact moment the land started rising. This void isn't natural. It's perfectly shaped, almost artificial, and it's filled with a substance that doesn't match any known geological material. Even more terrifying, similar voids are now appearing along fault lines throughout California, each one causing the ground above to buckle and rise. GPS stations that measure ground movement with millimeter precision are showing readings that should be impossible. Vertical displacement that normally takes thousands of years compressed into a single night. Is this the result of some unknown geological process? Or has something been deliberately excavating California from below? And could the entire state be about to collapse into these mysterious underground chambers? Along the entire California coastline, change is usually measured in fractions of an inch. Over decades, the land might rise or fall by a few millimeters each year, so slowly that only scientists with precise instruments can even notice. The Pacific and North American plates grind past each other beneath the state, building up strain along faults like the San Andreas and the Cascadia subduction zone. In the north, the Cascadia zone stretches from Cape Mendocino all the way to Vancouver Island, where the oceanic plate dives beneath the continent. This system is capable of unleashing massive earthquakes, but even then, the results rarely match what just happened. For most of recorded history, tectonic uplift along the California coast has been a gradual process. The coastal ranges have climbed over millions of years, but the annual increase is barely the width of a fingernail. In places like Santa Barbara or Crescent City, GPS stations have tracked the ground rising at rates of 1 to 3 millimeters per year, so slow that a century yields less than 4 inches. Even the most dramatic events on record, like the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan, lifted sections of shoreline by about 5 feet, but only in a few hours, and only across a limited stretch of coast. In California, scientists expect the opposite from the next big Cascadia quake: sudden drops, not rises. Models predict that a magnitude 9 event could cause the northern coast to sink by as much as 6 feet in a matter of minutes, flooding entire neighborhoods and erasing tide lines that had stood for generations. Dr. Marin Govorchin, the state's geology director, has spent years preparing for the day when the land might suddenly subside. She points to ghost forests in the Pacific Northwest, stands of dead trees where the ground dropped and salt water rushed in centuries ago. She says, "We plan for earthquakes that lower the coast, not lift it." If the land truly jumped 6 feet upward, that is not in any model we have ever run. The normal mechanisms simply do not allow for it. Volcanic inflation can push up the ground, but only by inches a year, and only in places with active magma chambers. Isostatic rebound, where the Earth rises after losing the weight of ice or water, happens over centuries, not hours. Even the most powerful human activities, pumping oil or injecting water underground, can shift the land by a few centimeters, never by feet, and never across hundreds of miles at once. The coastline, then, is a record of patience. It bends to the will of slow-moving plates, to the weight of tides and the pull of gravity, rarely giving up more than a sliver of ground in a single lifetime. That is why the sudden 6-foot rise is so hard to accept. It is not just unprecedented, it is impossible, within the rules geologists have trusted for generations. The instruments that normally track the tiniest changes are now reporting a leap that should have taken thousands of years. The gap between what is expected and what happened is not just a matter of scale. It is a challenge to the very foundation of Earth science. Dr. Marin Gavorchan watched the data feeds as the first GNSS readings arrived. Every station from Mendocino to Santa Barbara reported a 6-foot vertical jump. No slope, no warning, just a sudden, clean rise. The numbers were too stark to accept at face value. Standard protocol called for a full audit. The team pulled raw Rhinex files, ran them through independent processors, and checked antenna logs for interference or timing errors. Each check returned the same result: a flat line, then a vertical cliff at precisely 12:04 a.m. No atmospheric anomalies, no solar storms, no missing data. The signal was unmistakable. INSAR satellite images came next. Normally used to track slow fault movements or volcanic swelling, these interferograms now showed a dense band of concentric fringes along the coast. Each fringe marked centimeters of motion, but here the pattern was so tightly packed that phase unwrapping algorithms struggled to keep up. When the displacement map was converted to vertical movement, it matched the GNSS readings, a 6-foot rise, sharp and uniform over hundreds of miles. The team reran the analysis using different satellites, processors, and orbital baselines. The outcome never changed. It was consistent. Tide gauges at Crescent City, Monterey, and Port Hueneme confirmed the story from another angle. Sea level dropped by nearly 6 feet relative to the land, all at once. The instruments had been calibrated just weeks before. Maintenance logs were checked, sensor swaps were ruled out, reference datums were verified. No errors surfaced. The drop was real, and it was everywhere. To eliminate the possibility of a regional ocean anomaly, the team examined satellite altimetry and offshore buoy data. The ocean surface had not changed, only the land had moved, in perfect synchrony with tide gauges and ground stations. Cross-validation became relentless. Every data set, GNSS, INSAR, tide gauges, buoys, altimeters, was compared in every possible way. Each instrument had its own quirks, but none could explain a 6-foot step appearing simultaneously across independent networks. Uncertainty estimates, measured in centimeters, could not account for the magnitude or the precision of the event. Dr. Gavorchan's notes read like a litany of disbelief. Software error was ruled out by a dozen independent processing chains. Instrument failure, no outages, no unexplained offsets. Atmospheric interference, the pattern was too sharp, too consistent, unaffected by any known disturbance. By dawn, the evidence was unassailable. The California coastline had risen 6 feet, confirmed by the world's most precise measuring systems. The numbers left no room for doubt. The next move was obvious. The team would have to leave the lab and see what had happened on the ground. Dr. Marin Gavorchan's field team arrived at dawn, dragging portable gravimeters and seismic gear across the now elevated sand flats. Every instrument, every reading, pointed to something deeply unnatural beneath the new coastline. Gravity measurements, mapped in tight grids, revealed a sharp, city block-sized low, an abrupt drop in local density that no known rock formation could explain. The anomaly's outline was geometric, not rounded or jagged like natural caverns, but edged with clean, straight lines and precise angles. It looked as if someone had carved a perfect chamber deep beneath the shore. Seismic crews unspooled cables and set off controlled vibrations, listening for echoes from below. The reflections painted a picture of a hollow space, nearly rectangular, with walls that bounced back sound in ways that suggested smooth, engineered surfaces. The void extended for hundreds of meters, its roof sitting just beneath the uplifted ground. No collapse, no sagging, just an empty volume where solid earth should have been. The field scientists, seasoned by years of mapping faults and landslides, struggled to make sense of what the data showed. One geophysicist muttered that it was like imaging a subway tunnel, not a natural cave. This should not exist here. Drilling rigs arrived next, boring carefully into the margins of the anomaly. The first core samples came up with a thin metallic sheen, strange crystalline layers that flaked off in the sunlight. In the mobile lab, technicians ran isotope analyses on the recovered fragments. The results were immediate and baffling. Oxygen isotopes did not match any known terrestrial pattern. Magnesium and iron ratios landed far outside standard Earth values. Every test for radiogenic signatures, from strontium to neodymium, pointed to something that did not belong anywhere in the planet's catalog geology. The only comparisons came from meteorite databases, but even those fell short. Word spread quickly through the field camp. The void was not just empty space, it was lined with a material that defied classification. As more boreholes pierced the chamber's edge, each core repeated the same story, an engineered boundary, city block scale, filled with something neither rock nor metal, and isotopically alien. The field team's notes grew frantic. Gravity lows, seismic reflections, and exotic cores all agreed. Something artificial and unearthly had appeared beneath California's coast, and it had lifted the land above as if on a platform. The mystery was no longer just about how the ground rose, but what or who had built the chamber that made it possible. The night the coast rose, entire communities woke to a world they did not recognize. In Eureka, Harbor Master Tom Rivas stood on the pier at sunrise, staring at rows of fishing boats stranded in mud. The tide chart said high water, but the ocean was now 6 feet below the lowest dock. He radioed the fleet, voice tight, saying nobody's going anywhere. We're aground. The crab season, set to open in 3 days, was suddenly over before it began. Fishermen who had mortgaged their homes for new gear watched as their livelihoods dried up overnight. The channels that once cradled their boats had become empty trenches, too shallow for even a skiff to float. Down the coast in Morro Bay, restaurant owners unlocked their doors to the smell of dead kelp and stranded sea life. The waterfront, normally bustling with tourists and locals, had become a barren ledge above a scarred, exposed seabed. Tables that once offered sunset views of the surf now overlooked a wasteland of drying sand and gasping fish. Maria Lopez, whose family had run the same seafood shack for 2 generations, said they had lost everything they depended on. She said the ocean was their life, and now it was gone. Harbor authorities scrambled to assess the damage. Insurance agents fielded desperate calls about ruined seasons and lost cargo. Coastal engineers warned that docks, pilings, and seawalls were never designed to hang 6 feet above the water. Emergency meetings filled city halls from Crescent City to Santa Barbara, but there were no plans for a disaster like this. The state's Disaster Relief Fund, already stretched thin by wildfires and drought, faced billions in new claims from ports and marinas that had become useless overnight. Fishermen stood in small groups, boots caked in mud, debating whether to haul their boats out for storage or wait for answers that were not coming. Tom Rivas, normally the calm center of every storm, admitted he had worked this harbor for 30 years. We have seen tsunamis, storms, even oil spills, but nothing like this. The ocean just left us behind. As the sun climbed higher, the reality settled in. The coastline had changed in ways no one could fix. What was once a line between sea and land had become a cliff, and the people who lived and worked there were left on the wrong side. For families who had built their lives around the tides, the loss was more than economic. It was a break with the only world they had ever known. Inside state offices, the mood was anything but calm. By midday, California's Emergency Operations Center was fielding calls from federal agencies, each demanding a different response. The governor's staff pressed for transparency, worried that silence would only fuel rumors and panic. Meanwhile, federal officials from FEMA and Homeland Security insisted on a phased approach, citing national security statutes that allowed them to restrict information about threats to critical infrastructure. A memo circulated behind locked doors at FEMA headquarters outlined a plan for controlled disclosure. First, acknowledge unusual ground movement. Later, release technical details only after security reviews. The reasoning was blunt. Public knowledge of a geometric void stretching beneath the coast could trigger economic chaos, mass evacuations, and even market collapse. A federal security cordon was established along key stretches of coastline, with Coast Guard patrols and National Guard roadblocks turning away journalists and locals alike. Local authorities chafed at the orders. Some argued that their communities deserved the full truth, while others feared the backlash if the story broke without warning. In the background, whispers of a leak began to spread. Scientists, sworn to secrecy, debated whether to obey or to warn the public before the next void appeared. The tension between state and federal priorities grew sharper with every hour the coastline remained stranded above the sea. Within hours of the void's discovery, speculation took on a life of its own. 4 competing theories began to circulate, each more provocative than the last. The first, favored by traditional geologists, pointed to a freak tectonic process. Perhaps a buried fault had slipped in a new way, or a surge of deep-seated fluids had forced the land upward. Yet the geometric precision of the void left most experts unconvinced. The second camp blamed clandestine engineering, whispering about secret tunneling projects or massive underground infrastructure gone awry. Some insisted the military had been excavating beneath the coast for years, and that something had finally gone wrong. Others argued for a military experiment, an undisclosed weapons test, or a failed attempt at seismic control, with the void as its unintended legacy. The fourth and most unsettling idea came from outside the scientific mainstream. That theory held that the void's material and shape were evidence of something not of this world, an artificial construct with no human fingerprints. Each hypothesis had its own champions and critics, but none could explain every piece of evidence. The mystery only deepened as more voids began to appear, each one bending the rules of geology a little further. Every new theory seemed to raise more questions than it answered, fueling a sense of unease that no one could shake. The firewall couldn't hold. Less than 36 hours after the first emergency cordons went up, a short, jittery video clip began circulating among scientists and reporters. It had no metadata, no timestamp, just a panicked voice whispering over the hum of drilling rigs. The camera swept across a chamber carved with impossible precision, mirror-smooth walls, corners so sharp they looked machined, and a floor that glowed with a cold blue light. Every surface reflected the beam like polished metal, but the material did not match any alloy or mineral known to geology. In the background, a second voice pleaded, "Keep filming, they are coming." Within hours, the clip reached the inbox of a state senator who called for an emergency legislative hearing. The footage played on a secured screen as lawmakers and agency heads stared in silence. The void, stretching wider than a city block, looked engineered, not natural. One official demanded to know who authorized the drilling. Another asked if this was a military project gone rogue. No answers came. The whistleblower, later identified as a junior engineer from the seismic team at Point Conception, vanished from public view. Federal agents arrived at her apartment before dawn, seizing computers and hard drives. But by then, the footage was everywhere, mirrored, archived, impossible to erase. The public saw only fragments, the luminous floor, the perfect geometry, the frantic voices. The full recording, still classified, hinted at something stranger, a pattern etched into the chamber walls, pulsing in the blue light. For the first time, the crisis was no longer just a scientific mystery. It had become a matter of national panic, and the people demanding answers outnumbered those who could give them. California's ground keeps shifting, But the real upheaval is in what we think we know. When instruments record the impossible, every certainty is suddenly up for grabs. As new voids open beneath our feet, the line between natural disaster and deliberate act grows dangerously thin. Tonight, the safest ground is the question itself. What lies beneath, now and next? Share your theory in the comments below. Canada's sleeping volcano is awakening, and scientists are terrified by what they found because Mount Baker, just 25 kilometers from the Canadian border, is showing the exact same warning signs that appeared before Mount St. Helens exploded and devastated everything within 200 miles. Picture a massive ice-covered peak towering over Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, home to 3 million Canadians who have no idea they are living in the shadow of the closest active volcano to any major population center in Canada. This is not some distant threat. This is a geological monster that could bury entire cities under lahars, pyroclastic flows, and volcanic debris within hours. But here is what has volcanologists in complete panic. Mount Baker contains more glacial ice than all other Cascade volcanoes, except Mount Rainier combined. When this sleeping giant erupts, all that ice will melt instantly, creating massive lahars that will race down river valleys straight toward Canadian communities at 40 miles per hour. The most terrifying discovery came from recent seismic monitoring, showing unusual deep tremors and ground deformation patterns that match pre-eruption signatures from other Cascade volcanoes. The mountain is literally inflating as magma moves closer to the surface. Is Mount Baker's awakening just normal volcanic restlessness? Or are we watching the countdown to Canada's first major volcanic disaster that could devastate the most populated region of British Columbia? Canada's sleeping volcano is awakening, and scientists are terrified by what they found because Mount Baker, just 25 kilometers from the Canadian border, is showing the exact same warning signs that appeared before Mount St. Helens exploded and devastated everything within 200 miles. Western Canada is not as quiet as it looks. Hidden beneath forests, glaciers, and remote peaks, a chain of volcanic belts stretches from the Yukon border all the way to Vancouver Island. These are not isolated mountains. They are the scars and pressure points of a restless planet. 5 major volcanic belts cut across British Columbia and the Yukon, each shaped by powerful forces deep beneath the Earth. The Garibaldi Volcanic Belt forms the spine of southwestern British Columbia, running north from Vancouver through Whistler to Mount Meagher. Here, snow-capped peaks like Mount Garibaldi and Mount Price rise above alpine lakes and forests, their origins tied to the slow grind of tectonic plates. This belt is the northern extension of the famous Cascade Range, which includes Mount Baker just across the border. To the northeast, the Wells Gray and Clearwater Volcanic Field tells a different story. This region, stretching along the Clearwater and North Thompson rivers, is marked by lava plateaus and cinder cones rather than towering stratovolcanoes. Wells Gray Park is famous for waterfalls, but beneath the surface, it holds evidence of eruptions in the past 10,000 years. These flows once dammed rivers and reshaped entire valleys, creating landscapes that seem peaceful now, but bear the marks of violent change. Further north, the Stikine Volcanic Belt cuts through the rugged Cassiar Mountains and the remote wilderness of northwestern British Columbia. This belt is home to some of Canada's youngest and most active volcanoes, including the hauntingly barren Mount Edziza and the Tsiaks Cone. The eruption of Tsiaks in the 18th century produced lava flows that buried Nisga'a villages and left behind the stark black fields of the Nisga'a Memorial Lava Bed.